off.
Here we go. First podcast of 2025.
Yeah, there we go. Time of renewal and all that sort of stuff or whatever, right?
Yeah, the inevitable. I think sometimes the New Year's stuff gets a bad rap or kind of
I do
like
too.
wrapped up in some of the pop psychology. Like, if you weren't going to do it December 23rd, why are you going to do it January 1st kind of
Yeah,
thing?
yeah, yeah.
But, I like to use these times to reflect and,
Yeah, we're
look,
not.
look forward.
Yeah, listen, we're not cynics here. We're not going to yuck anybody's yum. A little bit of cynics, aren't we?
Yeah. Yeah.
And we do yuck a lot of yum. How was speaking of which, how was your New Year?
New Year. Well, I spent
The
New
holidays
Year's.
too.
Yeah, the holidays were good. Went down to Florida with my wife's side of the family, and then got to go to what was a real bucket list item for me, the Temple of the
Yeah, yeah, that sounds really
Universe.
cool.
Michael Singer wrote a book, Untethered Soul, which I kind of equate to being the inflection point in my life from
Mhm.
when I got really interested in contemplative stuff, as well as spirituality, meditation, yoga. And so he runs like a little ashram in Alachua, Florida, outside of Gainesville. And I got to go on my way back up north. I stopped off there for his Sunday morning kind of service, which was, I guess you'd call it a sermon of some sort, but
Yeah.
really just like a really interesting community there, and
Mhm.
was a bucket list item for me. How about you?
Yeah. Family was in for probably too long, but it was great. Uh, yeah, it was one of those like mom's getting a little older. Brother was in from Singapore. He teaches at a international school there, and because being a teacher in the U.S. totally blows by and large, but they respect you in other countries. So he's teaching there, gets paid well. He comes in a couple of times a year. Brought his girlfriend, so it was cool. Like we got to play tour guide and let her kind of show around North Carolina a little bit. She had all these like kind of items she wanted to tackle. It's funny when you realize like how much of someone's foreign experience of America through TikTok is largely fast food. So we get to watch her eat a lot of fast food, and uh, I think one of the funniest questions or moments we had during the entire trip was, for whatever reason, she wanted to pound some orange chicken from Panda Express. Did so, much to my protest. But again, we're not in the business of yucking yums, and helped her help facilitate that journey for her. And she passed out for 4 hours and woke up embarrassed and asked if all American food makes you sleepy. So all in all, it was a good time. I think I think you and I both probably resonate with this around the New Year's stuff. Like it does kind of get a bad rap, but I love it.
Yeah.
I For whatever reason, I think to me it's a more secular holiday that has a little more universal appeal, and I don't know. I think something that's always been orienting for me is that sort of pointer or instruction from my own contemplative practices that begin again. So there's something about that New Year's that kind of resonates with me in a way that I really actually value, and in a way that feels quasi religious. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's good.
Totally.
You
Well,
were
with it.
pretty busy.
Yeah, it's we got a lot going on. We got a
Yeah,
lot
we
going on.
did.
I guess should we just dive into our big topic of the day?
Dive into it. Yeah,
All
I
right.
think this is
So
super interesting.
yeah, so I think the way I would frame it, especially in terms of the new year, is one of my favorite things to do is to sit down and spend a lot of time compiling information from the last year and put together an annual report as well as a strategic plan for the upcoming year. And I haven't been able to do it the last couple of years, mainly because we were in a lot of chaos and I was fighting fires that were urgent and important.
Yeah.
And
Can
so,
we stop for a second? Because I think this is actually, you pointed something out really cool that a lot of people may not be aware of. I think this was like the first year the company went into the new year where it wasn't dire financial
yeah,
crisis and explosion. So that's a
yeah. So
pretty
if you
big
go
deal.
back 3 years was, ending 2021, and we were just starting AIM. So I had, raised some or borrowed some money to do that. And we were on a trajectory with AIM that felt pretty good, but we didn't know really what was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
That year in 2022, we completely, really almost went under, ran out of money. We had some issues with, I was getting essentially fraudulent financial reports, and that caused a lot of stress. Uh,
Yeah.
and then the last year, what happened was we had switched electronic health record systems, and we weren't able to receive payment for like 6 or 8 weeks,
That's a problem.
which really, really caused a ton of strain. So both the last couple of years, I was really just making sure we had money to cover payroll, which is a strange place to be in that amount of chaos, wondering if you can actually cover payroll while also fundamentally knowing that what you're doing is not just right morally, but it's right from like a business perspective as well.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the results were not bearing that out. So this is the first year where it feels like in some ways, I've proven the theory, or at least proven the business model that is, underlies kind of our outpatient services and our decision to go in network with a lot of insurance companies.
No, I would equate this. One of my favorite scenes in a movie is Money from Moneyball. We talked about this a bunch, but the scene where Jonah Hill's character is debating with Brad Pitt around something, and they're in the crux, and it's a bad, like real bad time, right? They're really feet to the fire, getting a theory tested, and he says something to the effect of like, "Listen, do we believe in this or not? If you believe in it, then what are we even talking about? Let's keep going."
Yeah.
Um, and this is maybe this going into this year at this point is sort of like them pulling up into the playoffs and coming up just a little short, but proof of concept is there.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. So, in terms of putting together this annual report, the annual report's just going to be, I mean, it's not just going to be numbers, but numbers and a
Right.
story about what we've done, kind of who we've added to the team, the number of patients we've served, how different,
Mm-hmm.
lines of service have grown or shrunk. And then looking ahead in terms of kind of the more strategic stuff, like what comes next. And there's now what I'm excited to talk about today is this managed services concept that we're going to explore, or I should say pursue. So
Yeah.
if you think about what we do, we primarily focus on the actual direct healthcare service provision, whatever you want to say. Like we do behavioral health. That's what
Yeah. Yeah.
people
Yeah.
think we do. And I'll probably spend 50% of the kind of look ahead on where I see our direct services growing, whether that's adding a mental health PHP and IOP, whether it's adding ketamine assisted therapy, uh, stuff like that.
Right. Right.
And then I'll probably spend 40% of the look ahead on this idea of a managed services organization, and 10% on technology. But today, I think what we're going to talk about is managed services.
Yeah. I think it's a really good place to start because, and I like this as a segue because essentially, maybe wittingly or unwittingly, we in the beginning of this we sort of framed the exact reason there's a big fucking value add for managed services. Uh, I mean, it's something we drastically struggled with going into this. And I think something that people probably underestimate is the amount of expertise necessary to make a viable healthcare organization, right? Like you can have all the well-meaning people get into this stuff for various reasons, but like structuring and having a functional healthcare entity entails a lot of disparate expertises that often don't they get outsourced and or don't speak to each other. And
Yeah.
so that would be kind of my volley for maybe what this managed services is, and if you want to hang some more like actual practical meat on the bones for that?
Yeah, so managed services can really mean a number of things, and in healthcare, especially when we're talking about the corporate practice of medicine, I can't own a medical practice. So what you do in order to set up a medical practice is you work with a physician owner and you say, hey, look, we're going to simplify your life. You're not going to have to think about billing. You're not going to have to think about patient scheduling. You're not going to have to think about running the HR, the finances. All you have to do is really focus on what you train to do as care for patients. And so managed services are really all of those back office functions that are not related to the direct healthcare provision.
Right.
And that can come in a number of flavors. I think in behavioral health, most people we know probably, if they bill insurance, are using a third party billing company. So the vast majority of people rely on some sort of third party billing company in order to verify the benefits, submit insurance claims, follow up on both the whatever patients owe and what insurance companies owe,
Mm-hmm.
resubmit claims if they've been denied, that kind of thing. Like that's just the revenue cycle management component of it. But then you could also think about the HR perspective. You need people who are recruiting your providers potentially, like if you're not doing it. So you could outsource that to any sort of headhunter agency for high level positions, or just a staffing agency for a kind of a more commoditized position, I guess you would
Right.
say. And then you think about, everyone thinks about accountants, at the end of the year when they got to do their taxes. But there's a lot you can be doing throughout the year to kind of optimize the business itself, but also just to make sure that you can focus on the actual patient care side of things. It's almost always this administrative burden that gets in the way.
Yeah.
And as much as I got interested in healthcare because of my interest in consciousness and the subjective experience and improving that.
Yeah.
But however I'm wired just makes me want to understand, like, what are the constraints and what's the next level of this game, that are, what are the rules that are affecting me that I am not even aware of. Right.
Yeah.
So again, how does insurance work? How does billing work? What are the kind of perceived limitations of any sort of model of care? So I've just gotten really interested in all of the other stuff that is outside of the actual direct service provision.
See, it's interesting because I think of all of these things as absolutely correlated and connected, right? Like, so if I was to hang like real meat on this, the way that I would frame it when I was coming out as a clinician, if I tried to open a private practice, it's not just create a janky website on WordPress, trying to get referrals, going to networking events, right? You can do that. But the more energy you're dedicating to that, to growing your practice, to building it out, to figuring out billing, to figuring out how to market yourself, to figure all this other sort of stuff that has to exist just so that you can practice your discipline. There's any number of fail points in that occupy and distract you from
Mm-hmm.
really your primary objective, right? Like if your primary focus is on being the best provider you can be, or running IOP or PHP or running some sort of healthcare services, the more you're having to focus on all of that other stuff, the less time you have to dedicate to refining your practice. And I think you know I think about the enormity of that. And so taking and having some sort of entity in which all of that stuff is packaged and managed for you unburdens you quite a bit, right?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely can. And I think it just goes back to, like, what are you interested in doing too? Like, if
Exactly.
you want to figure out all of this, like anyone who owned a practice or was growing a practice, if they were to come to me, I would tell them, hey, I believe in figuring all this stuff out yourself and bringing everything in house.
Yeah, which is what
Like
we're doing.
that's what I've done. I really believe in doing that, but you have to be committed to learning those other disciplines well enough so that it doesn't interfere with that, your core services.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, like, these things do often become a distraction. And it does require a tremendous amount of institutional knowledge in order to do this stuff, by the book, or do it really well.
Yeah.
And most people just aren't that interested in it. Like, I don't think most people love thinking about CPT codes and what is their clean claims rate, or what is the cost per acquisition for patients.
Yeah. Or going into each holiday season with catastrophic failure hanging over your head like a guillotine.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
I mean, there's like risk tolerance with this too, right? Like it's do you have the risk tolerance to grow and scale and make your mistakes and take your lumps and keep going? Because like we said, we're a couple of years into this, and this is the first time you've been able to go into the holiday season without actual like catastrophic, failure hanging over our heads.
Yeah, I think that could have been avoided. Like, in the kind of scenario you laid out, in terms of if you had opened a private practice, I think we see a lot of people do that successfully.
Right.
And I think where managed services really becomes more important is when you're talking about going from being something small that you can control most elements and you have enough understanding to make it work, to wanting to grow something bigger. And you want to grow something bigger, but you may not have all of the pieces of the puzzle. And so you would want to outsource some of those functions. It's also not that different, right, than working with a digital marketing agency. It's much more cost efficient to work with an agency than to try and bring that in-house. But there is some sort of tipping point, and it just depends if you're committed to bringing in all of that institutional knowledge and you want to manage those things, or if you just want someone to do it for you and hope that it, goes well.
Yeah. I think what's interesting about that is the tension for that is, do you have enough skin in the game and enough drive to be able to tolerate all the failures necessary to get to having the institutional knowledge and scaling in that way? And do you have enough hedge against the risk of failure versus you can just hire someone else to do it? The difference is, there's trade-offs with all of that.
Yeah.
What do you view as the sort of trade, like, just very succinctly and quickly, what do you view as the trade-offs between those two paths?
Well, if you're outsourcing anything, you're paying some sort of margin on it, right?
Right.
You're paying a margin on someone else's time and expertise. So ideally, it's like, let's maybe use an analogy in terms of farming, right? Like, you don't buy your, flour straight from the person who grew the wheat. It goes from, growing the wheat to some sort of refinement process, to some sort of packaging process, to some sort of logistics delivery, and then to a grocery store, and then you buy the flour. And there were a lot of businesses that touched, that touched the chain from being wheat in a field to being flour, in your shopping basket, and everybody had to make money along the way.
Yeah.
So ultimately the calculation becomes, is it cheaper to outsource it now, or does it make sense to bring it in-house? It's very unlikely that you're going to be able to do things as well as other people, right? Like, I would never do my own taxes. Like, that's why you pay an accountant.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's a very simple thing to understand. But it gets more complex when you are talking, especially about growing organizations, because it's like, okay, well, we could outsource it, or we could try and build some of the competencies, but there's a huge failure risk in trying to build these competencies. And so, to me, it's just a matter of and it's also just, at the end of the day, it's where do you want to spend your time? Do you want to spend your time thinking about HR? Do you want to build out all that goes into HR, not just recruiting and making sure you've got people, but performance management, compliance. There's all sorts of things, and you could just outsource it. And someone who is a real expert could then weigh in and provide some of those services for you, and it would be a lot cheaper for you than it would be for you to have an expert in house. Like, because a big piece of this is how much expertise do you actually need, and knowing what is good enough, right?
Yeah.
And that's how I think a lot about it right now, even from our perspective. Just like in our direct services, it's like, what is good enough for the stage of our organization? We can't actually be world class at everything we do from day one. Like, that's just not reality. And so you have to like accept that it's not perfect, or and that you're working on it, or say, hey, look, these guys really know what they're doing with X, Y, and Z. Maybe at some point we'll do this internally, but I can do a lot more, a lot faster by outsourcing it.
Yeah.
So let me try and make it. I feel like I've been speaking too abstractly. Like, the truth is, like, at our size company, right? Like, you're experiencing this just from like the marketing department is like, just to do good digital marketing really is a number of functions. You need someone who's producing like written content. You need someone who's making doing graphic design. You need someone who creates the content calendar. You need someone to post the content. And yes, one person can do all of this, but again, then your knowledge is fairly shallow across all that. And then who's developing the KPIs to measure these positions.
Right.
And it goes on and on. It's Russian nesting dolls.
Yeah.
Alternatively, if we were to partner up, I mean, this is just about economies of scale at the end of the day. Like, can we partner up with someone else and split the marketing budget and then hire an A+ player instead of us each having two, B players? So let's just say a B player costs $80,000 a year, and an A+ best in class costs $150,000 a year. And that A+ person can easily do the work of two B players. Well, right there, it's cheaper. It's cheaper to have the A+ person to do that, but you would need to be able to afford them. And either organization on its own might only be able to afford the $80,000.
So frame this as like the direction we're kind of looking at moving in, and how you're thinking about packaging some of this stuff and some of the directions you want to take the company in. Because I don't know if up until this point it's been clear, probably not, because I think we're still getting a little bit clear on what this means for us. But essentially, we're talking about diversifying what it is that we do as a company. So frame that in the most practical terms that you can.
Yeah. So in addition to growing our healthcare offerings, we want to help other people run their programs or practices moving forward. Personally, I feel like I've learned a lot of these lessons very viscerally in terms of like what happens when you don't have good financial management. And so I didn't solve the problem well enough. I am pursuing it to an absolute best-in-class solution. And once you learn how this works for others, like once we learn how to create very clear, transparent financial metrics, then we can do it for other people very easily, right? We can just say, this is what you're paying people. We can understand their finance, and we can really help them manage it more effectively because of a lot of the lessons we've learned.
Yeah. So essentially what we're talking about would be a package service in which we take over all the operations for you so that you can not make the same mistakes we did, whatever, outsource that.
Yeah, I think the way we're working on it with our attorneys right now is that we'll have a managed services agreement that's almost like a menu, right? Yeah. And you can choose from the menu what you would want us to do. That could be everything from, strategic consulting, which is kind of like my main area.
Mm-hmm.
Or it could be revenue cycle management in terms of running your billing for you. It could be HR, and it could be finance and accounting. And I think what makes us maybe unique in the value proposition that we're hoping to build out is this extremely data-driven nature, and not data-driven as in, hey, you should have KPIs for these positions, but no, like we are going to go to the source data and we are going to make your whole system work together.
Yeah.
And that's almost, and I've seen it firsthand that basically no one else has done that work. At least I haven't found anyone in behavioral health who understands kind of the back end data architecture of what creates a good business.
Right. And that is I think something we've learned and I've learned over the last year. That's a deep level of expertise, right? Like when because you could talk about, so I'll use it from my sort of seat, right? Like you could talk about patient acquisition cost, and you can have that general understanding of we have to spend X amount of dollars to acquire one patient for this line of service, and the lifetime revenue collection on that is X. And so we spent X to get Y or whatever. And you can have that concept in your head and know that that makes sense. And that can help you manage your practice, manage your business, components of all that sort of stuff. But it's an entirely different problem to solve to be able to build the data infrastructure and architecture necessary to get to that place. That's you can know where you need to go, but it's really tough to get there.
Yeah, and I think the other piece is so much of this to me is about predictability.
Yeah.
Like how do we see ahead of what's coming? How do we have a good idea how much we're going to get paid in a few months? When are we going to need to turn our attention to marketing? Anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And most people are working, pretty reactively because they, again, I don't want to just talk about data. But they usually don't have a good understanding of their own data. And like, I think we have miles and miles to go, but we spent 2 or 3 years just hammering home like the importance and then building our understanding of how to manage, clinical utilization so that we still had a good value proposition on why to work here. It's not like we're maximizing our provider's output, but knowing that, where that balance can be and how to structure things. So now it's really easy to go in and understand someone's business and what trade-offs they're also making. And I think a lot of it does come down to, what trade-offs are you making and
Yeah.
helping people identify those, because a lot of times they just don't even know that they're making that trade-off.
Right. So internally, when we start thinking about this as a new line of service and what we're offering, what sort of growth opportunities does this afford us as a let's
Yeah.
let's say this is like I would say like let's frame this as what sort of growth opportunities is it for the individual members, but also like as an organization.
Yeah, so I really how some of this got started was our CFO came to me and he's like, "Hey, look, like I love what we're doing. I want to see us do more of it, but I've got a little bit of bandwidth. Like there's more work I could be doing. I'm very interested in the financial side, and we seem to have developed this really unique way of viewing our finances where like I get a report every morning about how much cash is coming in.
Mm-hmm.
We measure with such clarity like where are the hiccups, what insurance
Mm-hmm.
companies aren't paying, how long does it take. We're getting to the place now where we can say, okay, we saw 250 med management patients today, and 175 therapy patients. We had 20 IOP sessions and 10 PHP sessions today, January 3rd. And that means we're likely going to see, $32,000 hit the bank account on February 3rd.
Right.
And like that kind of clarity is pretty much unprecedented in healthcare, or especially small behavioral health, because as a small provider, you don't have the time to figure this stuff out. You're just trying to keep the lights on, see your patients, do right by them.
Right.
And like I would have paid so much money to have this clarity over the last couple of years. And we've
Yeah.
invested hundreds of thousands of dollars to get here, right? And now we can really kind of share that information with other people. So
Yeah.
our CFO came to us and said, "Hey, this is something I'm interested in, and I'd like to bring on, someone else in finance. I think we could do this for other people successfully." And just so happens that I knew someone in the field who had a similar size organization, and they were having some of these financial challenges, utilization challenges, and just overall data management issues. And I said, "Oh, I might be able to solve that for you." And so that's kind of how it started. It was really just, talking to people, saying, "Hey, these are some of the reports I've got. It's helped me manage the practice. We could help you with it." So it started as a way. I view one of my, real goals or one of my jobs really is to continue to provide growth opportunities. So,
Right.
my CFO needed a growth opportunity because like we're solving problems at a level where his company, he's going to get paid more to do this somewhere else if he can solve these problems. So I've got to find a way to keep growing his compensation. Same thing could be said on the marketing front. So I think, what it does for us, how it affects our current team is not much. And I say not much in the sense that our current, like if we're talking about our administrative team and kind of maybe the executive team to some extent, but the people who are working on these like business functions, HR, finance, revenue cycle management, we are the ones who are going to experience the change with it. Hopefully it provides more paths to upward mobility in all of these departments. And I think like what it does, even just for our provider team, is hopefully like we don't, I want to grow. I want to see, more of this positive change that I think we're bringing to the world. But I have to balance like the desire for growth with how fast we can reasonably do that. And I think this provides us an avenue for growth that is not just seeing more patients, hiring more providers, but really helping other organizations grow. So I think like first and foremost, it should provide upward mobility in administrative positions that I don't think have always been given that opportunity, right? Like you need
Right.
someone answering the phone. They answer the phone. If they leave, you just hire someone else to answer the
Yeah.
phone. If you're a biller, you're a biller. And so I think like it's really important to me that we look at these positions and we really build out like how do people grow in their careers and
Exactly.
feel like it's meaningful work and it's helping them get somewhere. It's not just a job. So I think like, and I think that's often neglected in healthcare, writ large.
I think it's sort of a retro kind of concept or idea, right? Like the idea of someone starting in the mailroom and then they move their way up, and then all along the way there's these little stepping stones until the end of their career they're functioning as a president or a CEO, and they've developed these competencies from the ground all the way up. And I think a lot of times what tends to happen and I'll say this from my perspective in like healthcare stuff, what ends up happening is people develop reputations for something. Their choices for ability are to get poached and go somewhere else. So there tends to be this like proprietary ownership from one entity to the next over someone's experience, right? And the retort to that is always, well, for me, would always be like, well, how did you not create an opportunity for them to stay there and grow, right? Like you want to maintain that institutional knowledge and keep it internally if you can, because there's cohesion, there's cultural fits. And I think, what if we project this out 10 or 15 years from now and this thing has grown and it's bigger, and you have someone that fresh out of grad school or whatever, or fresh out of college or something like that, or high school or whatever, and they've worked their way up from boots on the ground all the way to this sort of upper management level leadership thing. There's a tremendous amount of institutional knowledge and understanding that's maintained and retained,
Yeah.
that I think is probably an insurmountable, I mean, just a tremendous value add to the culture and probably service delivery.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's like the key piece on, and it's tough. Like, it's a big burden when you have to, like you said, anytime you're having to retrain people or add new people to the
Yeah.
system, there's just, that does cost money. It just
Right.
doesn't, you don't get a bill for it, but there's a drag on the system. So, I mean, I think that's one of the, yeah, like you said, I didn't know where you were going when you said retro, but the idea that we would have career paths, I do think is something that, I mean, I think the most modern employers are not doing that well enough, and that's why people
Yeah.
switch jobs. I always wonder, because you hear about people job hopping so much now. uh I don't know if it's like an employer problem, if it's just the nature of things. But I do think like these like, you have to be very conscious of building those paths if you want good people to stay around, because otherwise they're just going to take the people, other organizations are going to come and say, hey, I've seen you did it over there, come do it for us, we're going to pay you more.
Yeah.
And I always want to be ahead of like, well, actually you're creating this much value, I need to go ahead and pay you more so that you're interested in staying here. And that's a really interesting, part of the game.
Yeah. I mean, this always got, for me, this is a really clear example of the sort of value proposition I think of Advaita Health overall, right? How do you give the best patient experience? How do you give the best provider experience? And then how do you marry those things to create upward mobility for all the employees? And I
Mm-hmm.
think what's, again, like a, background of philosophy, all that bullshit, right? But like the idea of ontological alignment, how do you create a common theme from all of those entities that's mirrored all the way up through an organization, right? Like, how do you be what it is that you say that you are, right? And so to me, that's what that sort of proposition holds. And I think it's pretty cool, right? It's a really weird, esoteric idea that I think we're starting to model out some. It's kind of fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Any closing thoughts?
Um, hmm. No, I'm really excited. I'm excited. I when we talk about our vision of, this idea that healthcare, great healthcare should be a standard, not a luxury. And when we talk about the idea that we want to create opportunities so that everyone experiences flourishing, I think this managed services piece to me is a way that we're going to provide uh, really hard won knowledge to smaller organizations or organizations our size, maybe even bigger, and help them do more of the right work.
Yeah.
It's, healthcare is incredibly bureaucratic, and there are all these different stakeholders. And I wouldn't want I would not want my therapist, I don't think, to be worried about, what the General Assembly is thinking. I don't want
Right.
my therapist, you know, optimizing the schedule for billing purposes. I don't want my therapist managing all of this information. I want them being a master of their craft. I want them spending their free time, really honing their approach, studying, going back, reviewing their notes, seeing how they can be, play a bigger impact. And so at the end of the day, I view that because I'm not a provider, and I guess this is like finally where I was supposed to be in some ways. Like,
Yeah.
I really enjoy the system level work. I really enjoy trying to put these disparate pieces together. And I really want to help other organizations avoid a lot of the pitfalls that we have in the past, because it's really tough. I think anyone who's going out there and starting a practice, starting a business, I have a lot of respect for anyone in the arena. And think, um, I think I would like to have paid to avoid a lot of my hardships. And so now
Yeah.
we're going to have an offering that says, hey, if you want help with some of these issues so you can focus on your craft, give us a call.
Perfect. Look at that, man. Hand gestures.